Okay, recording started. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Karen van Brussel. I'm the project coordinator of the Epicenter project. The Epicenter project is a Horizon 2020 project, so it's funded by the EU. We're striving towards efficient, robust, and green supply chains. And an important factor of that is through digitalization and data sharing. And that's why we're happy that Nexport International is here today to share their thoughts and their knowledge on this topic and how that is also implemented in the Epicenter project. So here's the plan is that the minutes will be or the presentation will be around half an hour, 40 minutes, and then we have some time left for questions and answers. So if you have questions, you can already put them in the chat, and I will pick them up later, or otherwise you can ask them after the presentation. Okay, Geert, go ahead.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks for having me. Most of you I've met at the time you were in Antwerp, I think, in the Port House. For those who don't know me, my name is Geert Wilde. I'm COO of Nexport International. Nexport International is a joint venture between Nexport, the Antwerp company, and Vopak Ventures, which was created back already 2 years ago. We are today active in Europe, but especially also in the US with an operational company in Houston, Texas, and a company in Singapore in Asia. And happy also to have, in the meantime, to be active as well in Australasia with several new projects coming up in the next few weeks and months. Maybe those who know me might ask the question, what am I doing here to talk about green logistics, about sustainable supply chains? Well, I will take you a few times back to the near history, I would say, to discuss about the current state of data sharing in logistics, as well as the near future. And of course, what we have seen the last few years is almost not normal, we say, but of course, logistics and supply chains have always been in a state of disruption. We are all faced, and these are points which we will not go too deep in this, because we will all recognize them. They're from the last few months. We still see the impact, and we will continue to see the impact, basically, of climate change, of course, which is very much related, of course, to this topic of sustainable supply chains. We have seen, of course, the impact and the impact on global business, I would say, of the pandemic. We still see that happening today. This is something we are all learning to deal with, and we have seen, especially also from a data sharing perspective, that there are to each crisis definitely a lot of opportunities to do it in, or to continue to move cargo from different areas around the world. The geopolitics, the war in Ukraine, of course, has all impacted us. If we look especially at one part of the business, rail operations between China and Europe, which is, of course, a very environmental friendly way of transporting goods from that area, compared especially to the air freight solutions for cargo, which has to be delivered, let's say, within 3 weeks. This has impacted basically, of course, this type of business, and is cutting a specific solution for transportation to Europe, with all the other impact, of course, it has on how we are doing business and how we are and our customers are selecting ports and platforms. Inclusive of that, of course, is the way countries start to protect their borders, not only because of the war, but also because of For instance, illegal substances which are being shipped, which you don't want to have in your port, but also you want to know, as for instance, a port authority, what's happening inside your port from a security perspective. Not only a physical one with a fence. Some ports, as the Port of Antwerp, you cannot basically fence it because it's too big as an area, but you want to do that in a different way, being a digital way. We strongly believe as well that food shortage, okay, one side you have that war in Ukraine and the impact on the global food supplies, with a strong focus also on the difficulties certain African countries have been facing. We believe strongly that today there are already solutions in place who can help to smooth the delivery of food in certain areas around the world, thanks to, of course, data sharing. But these are basically the challenges which are putting pressure on the system, as we know, and as what we consider to be normal. At the same time, the industry challenges have not changed as well. And this is maybe something we could have done before, but there continues to be a lack of confidence and trust in the supply chain in general, which brings, of course, difficulties if we want to reach, at the end of the day, an environmental friendly way of transporting and of doing business. It requires real-time insights, and real-time insights you will obtain them if you can tear down the walls basically between the different stakeholders in a supply chain. That has an immediate impact as well, that you can basically increase efficiency. Today you have a low efficiency in certain areas of the business. It means that there is transparency towards the end customer, and that will lead, of course, to a more productive and a more customer-centric way of doing business. The adaptability to change, which is definitely also a challenge which this industry is facing, continue to be, and of course those disruptions which I've shown you before have not helped. And we have seen many disruptions before that. Remember the volcano, the tsunami, all these natural disasters which have taken place over the last 20 years have made that stakeholders in such a supply chain have to become like a firefighter and face the difficulty of the day. But also the sense of urgency is lacking. And that, of course, is something which probably the energy transition, and I will go a little bit deeper into that later on, which we believe that the energy transition will help companies to see that there is a kind of an urgency today, and there's an immediate urgency basically to start sharing data, because that's basically what customers want. And we have seen that happening in the e-commerce. That has helped enormously on the last mile delivery or the land side of the business. We've seen some initiatives as well on the maritime side, which is not yet very clear how that's going to be further developed, but customers are not shipping cargo from one part or from one port to another, or from one location by truck to another location. No, this is in many cases, of course, part of a larger supply chain where components are being shipped on a global basis. And that brings me, of course, one of those obstacles is as well the standardization. And I think also some of us here sitting inside this call have been raised their voice many times on how to standardize and especially on the implementation of standards, because they exist today. Maybe there are a little bit too many, but it's clear that if we want really to make also the ESG reportings, for instance, if we talk about environment, if we want to make that happen, if we want to make sure that green energy is green energy and with a full audit trail on that, that we need to standardize and apply the standards which allow the business to implement a data sharing policy and to make sure that data is being able to be reused and becomes real-time data. And of course there is, and that this one I added recently, although it's not new, but it definitely also has an impact on the industry challenges which everybody is facing, whether it's someone who is doing transportation of goods over by truck, or whether it's someone who's in a warehouse operation. I've seen recently cases where the night shift doesn't of a warehouse operation in the e-commerce cannot start because there's not sufficient labor. The production of certain components and of certain products is being shifted to other parts of the world. Okay, what is the impact from a cost perspective on what we are selling to the customer, but also on the visibility? Where are the cargoes? When can we deliver? A car typically today takes 8 to 15 months to be delivered. We could not have imagined that a few years back when we were like, we have to wait 3 months for a new car. That was like unseen. Today, it's the reality and we all have to accept it. And part of it is, of course, also because those cars are ready and standing, produced even on car terminals in ports. So it's really all over the place. I would say the fact that there is an absolute shortage of staff, and that's in the physical labor, but that's also, for instance, in the software industry, where projects are taking time, and the complexity of onboarding customers is still something which is in the coming months, I think, something where we have to take care of if we want really to meet also the environmental and other reportings which are coming our way. The challenge was clear for stakeholders in a port environment. That was, save money because you and bring visibility to a port by sharing data between public and private stakeholders, and that will be the magic, that will do the trick basically. But nobody could have seen back in 2016 that those challenges, and especially also the industry challenges would be so severe, I would say, and difficult to manage. Nevertheless, I think a lot has been achieved already, and we are quite proud on what we have realized, looking back over the last 6 years, and especially also looking towards the future. Because creating visibility in that supply chain, whether it's in that port environment, or on the maritime side, or at the land side, or even in a warehouse operation, it exists today. And we could basically say this is a first hurdle which has been taken. We do see today that there are many applications in the market which allow customers to have a good, I would not say a real time, but a good visibility on what's happening with cargo. And I think that's also the first point which you really need, parameter which you need to make sure that you come at the end of the day, that you can create smart ports, etc. So this visibility part, driven especially also by that e-commerce in first instance, is taking slowly, but definitely it starts to happen. And looking at port optimizations, rail movements, using sensor data, using RFID, using satellite images, it all exists, it all comes together, and it's getting better day by day, I would say. And that brings us to the second part, which you need to build at the end of the day a more sustainable port, and that's to create that efficiency in the supply chain. It was a little bit strange that at the end of the day, a customer, a producer or a buyer, an importer, an exporter, a shipper, had to look for its own solution while paying basically to transport goods from one place to the other. The visibility part was missing, but at the same time, there was pressure on freight rates. There was pressure also on having less suppliers in such a supply chain, and it was crazy from time to time. I've seen cases where shipping a container from the US to a warehouse in the port of Antwerp, you had like 13 companies, 13 companies involved. Or if you really look at it, you could say, okay, maybe you could have done that with 3 or 4. But it was the reality. And of course, by providing the visibility in that supply chain, few of those who are less performing or are not really needed inside that supply chain as such to move a container box, risk, of course, to lose their job. At the same time, that was not the problem. The point was, can you transform your company in such a way that you still have value to be added to that supply chain and make it even more efficient? So I think also in this area, we see that where we had discussions with potential customers and customers who are looking for visibility tools on a data sharing platform. Today, we see that this part really is taking shape on, we now have that visibility, how we can really create that efficiency. And most of the applications which are coming onto our marketplace soon or have been put on the marketplace have this angle of efficiency gain, I would say. And so that's basically the second step in a process towards where we want to go. The third step here is creating predictability. And of course, if we add on top of the models where we have visibility and efficiency gain, you can start to predict the future. Artificial intelligence will help us, sensor data will help us. That's happening as well. You see, so today that those applications who have been developing and have brought that efficiency gain into the process of shipping cargo are now also bringing and creating predictability inside the supply chain. And this one is a very important one, of course, if you want to make sure that you are going to do better, not only from a price perspective, but especially also from an emission perspective. If you want to do better, if you can predict how cargo will be moved or what will be the impact of certain events which might occur on the way to the final destination, if you can create that predictability, you will gain basically, maybe avoid even transportation. It's not always about to transport cargo, but also to make sure that the payload has been optimized, make sure that the right transport modus has been used. Easy example for me, most obvious continues to be containers which have an idle time of, let's say, 3 to 4 days in a port. Why don't we use one of those days to put those containers on rail rather than ship them last minute by truck? If we could cut the idle time of 4 days by 1 or by 2 days, it's easy to reach a lot of destinations or extra destinations compared by the trucking part. Of course, not all ports in the world are facing the same problems, but everybody is looking, of course, to bring that sustainability part as well on the table. We've seen that 65% today in certain areas around the world, 70% is looking today more for sustainable solutions rather than the price solution, I would say. And this is, of course, also very important as this environmental, social, and corporate governance reporting is coming up. The UN as well, having set their clear goals, where if you look at the environmental part, we all have, of course, the responsibility to make sure that we encourage the development and diffusion of environmental friendly technologies. So that's, of course, a step towards having built already the 3 previous components, visibility, efficiency, and predictability. If you can predict, basically, you can create a more sustainable supply chain. But you can only do that by working together. A company as such, having data, and that's in many cases also one of the tricky points. You have data, but what kind of data? Is this data ready to be used by other parties in that same supply chain to make sure that you can provide what you need to bring on the table towards your customer? And whether the customer is a terminal, a shipping line, or someone who's shipping freight, or an authority, or a governmental body which needs that reporting, well, you will have to make sure that the data speaks and is able to interact with the other parties in that same supply chain. So the subject is quite complicated, but it's clear that standardization efforts have helped already partly to come to a point where we could say certain areas in the world are able to report on and have an audit trail basically as well on where to go. But it's also clear that at the same time, if we really want to go for those decarbonization, think about Fit for 55 of the EU, that there is still a long way to go. And so if looking at the future, sustainability basically is no longer an option. We could say yeah, that's already today the case, absolutely. But it's gonna go much faster than what we have seen before. Future fuels, it's clear that the impact of the global energy crisis which we have today is going to make the adaptation, but also the shipping then, of course, of future fuels, let me call them like that, because there might be different ones, is going to require real-time data. Because if you want to have an audit trail on whether ammonia is green, on whether hydrogen has been produced somewhere and is being shipped to a certain point, whether you want to connect or give priority to a certain vessel, yes or no, you will need real-time data. This is a big change. This is something you will no longer be able to do by a simple Excel file or by taking the phone and saying, well, my vessel is going to arrive, which is still the case today in certain areas and certain ports. So the fact that you need this audit trail and those deliveries which require and have an impact also, of course, on container vessels arriving or bulk vessels arriving in certain ports is going to change. And so that's why I say this is no longer an option as such. But also sustainable artificial intelligence. If you want to create smart ports based on predictions, and today, and so, as I mentioned already, this is no longer futuristics, but applications are widely available. Of course, the models are changing, but it's more like the data again, and not only the data of my own company, but especially also the data of the origin port, of the destination port. So if you can share that data and make sure that it's standardized and it's readable by the different parties in that supply chain, applying artificial intelligence, we will reach that third step, being the predictability of that supply chain, which will bring then us automatically into, we could say, amongst others, green shipping corridors. And we have seen recent examples, for instance, the Iron Road between Australia and Japan for bulk deliveries, okay, which does require absolutely a different way of CapEx and CapEx renewal. Vessels using clean energy, that's one, but also the optimization of the total flow of the goods. How are we going to, which route we are going to take? We see, for instance, in the liquid bulk as such, that in certain ports, vessels have to go back to the seaside once they have unloaded one specific on a specific terminal, have to wait, then they can go back. Well, imagine if you could just know, and the solutions exist today in applications which we have already on the Nexport platform, by the way, that we know that yeah, it's maybe better to wait one day to call a specific vessel, but to save at the end of the day of the voyage, or at the end of the voyage, I should say, 14 days in total, because there is an efficient communication between the different terminals which where those cargoes have to be unloaded. But building green shipping corridors, and another example is, of course, the Singapore-Rotterdam green corridor, which has been announced recently. It's also something which might, of course, require a different kind of legislation. So it all comes together here again, public and private companies working hand in hand. So digitization and decarbonization, in many cases, that's driven, of course, by customer demand and customer and cost saving potential. This is still today the case, but we see that an important challenge in here as well is, of course, the culture of a company and, of course, the culture of the industry as such. If we cannot tear down the siloed mentality within supply chain as such, and of course that's a contradiction because it's a chain, so you need a lot of actors playing and working together. But if then we don't share that data between the different parties, it's going to stay a paper-driven process, which is of course not the idea. But this will lead as well to a different type of stakeholder, right? Because we will see, of course, digital companies, those leading the digital environment, I would say, coming up and being very active in the field, driven by the e-commerce in first instance, but positioning themselves more towards ports and a full end-to-end supply chain as well. And of course, it's like, if we speak about decarbonization, it's like, the energy crisis makes us realizing that if we don't use energy, we don't pay for the energy. If we don't ship cargo, we don't pay for the shipment. If we ship in an optimized way, we will only pay a fraction of what we pay to charter a full vessel or to rent a full container. So this is also a way which, thanks to the visibility, brings us to new models of storage, of warehousing, and shipping cargoes. So it's a very interesting time where we are able to bring those new solutions on the table. But also from a regulations point of view, and I've mentioned that already shortly when discussing about the green shipping corridors, of course, also a different regulation impacting green port strategy when it comes to public policy, transportation companies, but also the relation, I would say, between the private and the port communities, the security aspects, of course. How can we make sure that there are incentives on workforce training, for instance, but maybe also tax reductions? I've seen a very interesting presentation recently in Germany discussing on hydrogen trucks. Trucks running on hydrogen require basically a full running time of 22 hours per day. How are we going to do that? 22 hours a day, 7 on 7. Yeah, it's a different concept than what we know today, where trucks have to stop, where drivers have to take their rest time. So there's no return on investment if you just look at it from an economical perspective for someone to invest in 5,000 hydrogen trucks in Germany. And this might require, of course, kinds of government help, and to make sure also that the infrastructure is modernized, that infrastructure to take that hydrogen fuel, for instance, is available, and that the necessary permits and regulations do exist. With as ultimate, I would say, is, of course, we might all be dreaming of, could call it electrifying ports, but we could also say fully digitized environment where everything is happening in an environmental friendly, CO2 neutral or emission neutral environment. This brings us, of course, also to the topic of cybersecurity, which is a very hot topic in a city like Antwerp, not the port of Antwerp, but the city of Antwerp, where anything which is moving in a port can be recognized. I think that from a technological point of view, a lot exists already today. And a lot is possible, but also from a regulatory perspective, it is still a way to go. So if we want to take those two last steps going into predictability, at one side, think about predictive maintenance, for instance, of any kind of equipment which you have in a port environment or beyond, because it's not only the port, it's about supply chains. And availability of equipment, but also the availability of labor. If all of that is basically interconnected to each other, and you know exactly what is happening also at the other side of the world, because goods, a port, you are shipping cargo from one point to another, requires as well to have that input and information from the port of origin or the port of destination to make sure that the impact of making a decision and having that possibility to predict have also a positive impact, of course, on the sustainability of the port where you're shipping to or from. So this requires, and then this for me is like, it's no longer an option, it's reality. And how are we going to do that? I will not elaborate too much on the technical aspects of data sharing, because I think there are definitely we are available to discuss on that. But just as a general overview, I think what has been developed in the Port of Antwerp 6 years ago by the private port community, saying we do believe that we have to share data amongst each other. We have seen that the adaptation process is very long, and there is a need for a very low entry barrier. There is a need for an interoperable platform which connects different stakeholders, different users of platforms around the world. There's a need for a marketplace which is, and or different marketplaces, which bring the real value to the market, being applications made by the local market and being distributed all over the world and made available on the same data backbone, which is then capable of standardizing and reusing the data to make sure that the prediction which is being made somewhere is based basically on the visibility and efficiency which is maybe created in another port. And as such, bringing sustainable applications onto the market. And that's the fourth evolution which we have seen: visibility, efficiency, predictability. We now do see that there's more focus on applications which are using and are bringing real added value if we want to make sure that the emissions of the transport which we are doing throughout the world is based on standardized data available from, I would say, a single source of truth. Of course, that requires basically, and that's how we have set up our platform, 3 different layers of within such a platform, making sure that there is no there's interaction possible, but absolutely the layers are separated from each other, are in different environments even. At one side, we see, of course, the adaptation of APIs, which is really needed if you go and want to be able to capture and use real-time data in the supply chain. So an API enabling data backbone, co-created solutions and applications, which today would leave to the market, local app builders, big corporates, but as well, of course, startups who have brilliant ideas on how to report ESGs, making them available in the marketplace. That's still the concept as from day one, and it still works today. We see that we have a good adaptation there on an almost global level. So it continues to be the power of together. And that's also, of course, what we see in Epicenter, where you want to make sure that data is easily accessible in a safe environment, but in a trusted way to anyone who is authorized to see that data, with a single source of truth, different stakeholders, not necessarily sharing any type of commercial data, but just the data which they need. And I can assure you that in the latest set of APIs which we have developed within Nexport, we do see that we are capable as well of connecting different platforms. Port Exchange in Houston is one of the examples. SG TradeX in Singapore in the liquid bulk, both in the liquid bulk, where we do share data from terminals with those platforms and share that same data with other stakeholders in the supply chain, but which might be enriched by other data than the one which is shared with other platforms. So that goes through that same type of API, which is of course secure and safe. So that's also how, and these are a few examples of I would say communities, because we call these communities on our Nexport platform today, who do require today real-time data, who are in process, I would say, of also adapting the API first strategy towards the different stakeholders in the different parts of the world. And of course, in this epicenter project, we are happy to cooperate with the Port of Montreal, where we do have a specific use case, and definitely want to invite as well others to participate on building, I would say, a transatlantic marketplace where different stakeholders are sharing data in a trusted way around specific use cases. Of course, that requires as well specific marketplaces, which we will launch soon, enabling participants in first instance, of course, of Epicenter to share data and to start building that data sharing, starting from the visibility part into creating that efficiency and transparency to the sustainable reporting. Because if you have a specific data set around a shipment, you know on which vessel goods have been shipped or which truck has been used. These are extra data sets which can be added, if available, of course, from different applications, and where APIs are then able to retrieve the data and use that data in specific formats to build, at the end of the day, a real end-to-end visibility of these greenhouse gas emissions across the supply chain, inclusive those scope 3, with real-time trusted data. So this is high level, of course, how we do see the interaction between sustainable supply chains at one side, data sharing at the other. How can both benefits, how can we make a more sustainable supply chain thanks to data sharing? There are different ways. You have applications, there are communities, there are great initiatives like Epicenter where we have the ability to test and monitor how that works. But at the same time, I would say there is a huge market which starts to pop up from different parts of the world, and where through those marketplaces, we like as Nexport to make sure that we bring those different solutions to the different marketplaces and markets in the shortest possible time and in the most secure way. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm ready for questions, if any.
Thank you, Geert, for the nice presentation. Yes, indeed, we have some time left for questions. There are no questions in the chat, but feel free to ask them now. Okay, I think everything was clear.
Thank you then.
Okay, well, very good. Thanks a lot. Wait, my camera back on. There we go. So thanks a lot, everyone, for joining. Thanks a lot, Geert, again for the presentation. We will post this, as I mentioned, on the Epicenter website. It's epicenterproject.eu as a educational material, so it's possible to review it again where needed. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Have a
Bye.
nice day.